Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is Tuesday at 10:30, so I hope everyone's doing good. I've been watching some cool movies again. I've been kind of anticipating, kind of excited, a little bit with a little bit of reservation, but I'm really excited to see the new Guillermo del Toro Frankenstein, starring Oscar Isaacs and Mia Goth. It's coming out. Right after Halloween. It would have been cool if it was coming out on Halloween. You would think they would do that, but it's coming, I guess, out on November 5th or something like that. But anyway, I want to do a special show. Again, I'm just a little, not even a little cog in the wheel here, but I just kind of wanted to do a little show about recent remarks by the iconic director Ridley Scott and my feelings about his remarks and kind of what that means and what it means to me. Again, I'm just a little nobody, but I still feel like it's a really important thing to address. And this isn't the first time I feel like something like this has happened. And it's an argument that many people have made, and I think there's definitely some good standing in that argument. I've been a person who has somewhat leaned in that direction, but I generally don't go all the way because I feel like ultimately it's not true. So Ridley Scott, I guess, just did like a they had a showing. He had a presentation, I guess, in England where where they showed Blade Runner, and it was they showed Blade Runner on the big screen. It was some big presentation that he was doing, and then there was a big interview that Ridley Scott did after the movie. And in this interview, he basically attacked and kind of destroyed new movies and new Hollywood films and just in general the state of movies. He basically said that as fans of films, we all of the films that come out now, we live in a world of just terrible films. He even described mediocrity. That was the word that he used. Everything is mediocre, and then he also went as far as saying that all that basically all the new films that are coming out are just shit, and that they rely too much on CGI. There's no real story. They used an abundance of CGI effects in a lot of new films because their stories are just not strong enough. And then he went to kind of an extreme thing where he actually said that what he's been doing lately in his own habits is he actually watches his own films. And he says, and he was boasting in I guess apparently in this interview on how his films are so good and they age like they don't age. They're not dated, and they just look great. And he was like particularly talking about Black Hawk Down, where he was saying on how that movie is so great and how it's aged so well over the years. And my first reaction when I hear him say this and basically attack Hollywood and new films especially is to me it's just so outrageous and just so well, terrible in a lot of ways. Again, Ridley Scott, I mean, he's made so many iconic movies, but you have to take into account when those movies were made. I mean, Blade Runner, for instance, is one of my all-time favorite movies. He also made The Duelist, Alien. I mean, the list is endless. During that particular period, in the '70s and then in the '80s. Somewhat later films, Gladiator is, I think, really, really great. And then he did a film a few years ago which was pretty good. It's not, I think it was a little bit underrated, but The Last Duel with Matt Damon. Um, but arguably I feel like his shine as a director, I mean, again, he's made so many great films, especially those that I mentioned. Blade Runner, Alien, probably the greatest. And I got the Duelist. I had been wanting to see that movie for such a long time, and I finally got it. Which was his first film. Really fantastic movie. It was the movie that he got discovered. The studio, Fox Studios, saw that and got him involved with Alien, with directing Alien, the first one, after seeing that film. But my reaction to his views. I mean, again, he's almost 90 years old. He's been around forever, and he is still really, really prolific. But I feel like he hasn't actually made. This is coming from a guy who has, again, I think late 70s, 80s, some in the 90s maybe. He made some really great films, iconic films in science fiction. Blade Runner, probably the most iconic science fiction movie, one of my all-time favorites, and then also Alien, one of the greatest sci-fi horror films of all time. So he's made some, he's left his mark without a doubt, and his influence is there in the universe forever, and his mark is cemented. But honestly, I feel like he hasn't made a good movie in decades, and I feel like the same. It's kind of the same thing of where I I feel the same way about James Cameron. Again, James Cameron was responsible for some really great films really early on in his career that cemented this legacy. But I feel like, for me, it brings back the classic Spider-Man saying, or kind of what Spider-Man's all about. With great power comes great responsibility. And I feel like what James Cameron has kind of evolved to, and he's made similar remarks. He's attacked his fans because people were complaining about some of the Blu-ray editions that he's put out of his own movies, and there was a little bit of criticism on the quality, and he basically verbally attacked his fans for that. And I feel like both of these guys have created a legacy and have so much money that what's happened, and I think George Lucas, I also include George Lucas in this category, where they have so much money and so much power, they've accumulated so much success that also entailed their heads being up so far up their own ass to where they don't care about their fan base, they don't care about reality outside of their own fucking reality that they've created over the years. And I feel like Ridley Scott, I've lost so much respect for Ridley Scott, to be honest. I've lost an incredible amount of respect for James Cameron because of his remarks. I kind of feel like he's a pompous, arrogant ass, and I feel like Ridley Scott is a pompous, arrogant ass when it comes to attacking people and being so self-centered and so far up his own ass about his quality. And this is coming from a director, again, who hasn't really made a good movie in decades. I don't know why it's a thing, but Ridley Scott, again, he's incredibly proactive. He's been putting out movies like every year. But in all honesty, I think they're just garbage. I think they're garbage. For whatever reason, he is on this tear and he is making movies every year, and they're garbage. I feel like if you compare anything that he's done within the last 5 years to his prime time, when he was going so strong and when he was younger in the 80s, 70s and 80s, there's no comparison to the quality of his work. Everything he does now is just like a sequel or a reimagining or trying to like with what he's done with the Gladiator films and what he's been. The worst part of it is what he's done to the Alien franchise. I mean, he's just single-handedly driven that whole franchise even further into the shitter, as far as I'm concerned. And part of me is a little bit conflicted on saying that, on having these kinds of remarks, because again, Blade Runner, Alien, is, the Duelist, those films are just incredible, and I'm such a huge fan of those films. But I gotta think that those movies are like, you know, close to 40 years ago, and here he is just, refusing to admit or to give some kind of props to newer filmmakers and some spectacular films that have been coming out, and just coming across as such a megamaniacal, narcissistic jerk who has a lot of power, a lot of money, and he gets the green light for every project that he does just based on his name for movies that he did decades ago. And he has no consistency at all, I don't think, in his career. Uh, I mean, you take a film like Blade Runner, like I've said already, and you compare it to anything that he's done within the last 10 or 12 years. Virtually everything he's done has been completely forgettable and will be, again, forgotten in the next couple of years. Blade Runner, on the other hand, will be around forever. So you just have to look at. I love directors that have a consistency, and they have this big, giant body of work that you can always go back to and reflect on, and revisit these films and these classics. But there's a consistency, and but with him, with Ridley Scott, I feel like he is he just comes across as such an egotistical douchebag. Now he comes across as this really angry old man who has a lot of money, and again, he can say whatever he wants to say. That's fine, but he just comes across as this old, angry curmudgeon, and I'm just like, I don't want to see any of his films. I haven't seen any of his films in a while because I feel like I don't know what went wrong with his career. I think like his whole take on coming back into the Alien franchise was just god awful. Like with his film Prometheus, which was just such a horrible misstep, and then Covenant, which was even worse, and then his influence, with Alien Romulus, which came out last year, and he was a producer on that, and him just really forcing himself into the writing process and the influence. I really believe that he really grossly probably interfered in the making of Alien Romulus, who it was directed by Fede Alvarez, who is an incredible director, but I feel like Scott had such an influence in that movie that he like forced this issue that you got to tie in my ridiculous Prometheus storyline, which was so absurd and asinine. I feel like he put pressure on Fede Alvarez, and then as well, the studio themselves were like, well, we have to make this a greatest hits movie where we gotta like highlight and talk about every movie somehow in this storyline to appease all of our fans, and because we think that people are all idiots and they don't want anything original or something fresh or a new idea, and it was done out of contempt for the public. And I feel like that's where Ridley Scott has evolved to. And again, you can say, and I can say freely that I think, yeah, I've been in that case where I've seen a lot of newer films and I'm like, man, this is really depressing, and I'm not really seeing anything really good. But I think the thing is now in 2025, and with the digital age and stuff, we're inundated more and more with more content. But I don't think it's changed. I think there's been some incredible films that have come out, and I think the process of you might have to sift through things a little bit more because there's so much coming out. But I don't think there. I think what he is saying, what Ridley Scott is saying about in regards to the current state of if a film is so grossly ignorant and so egotistical, and he's totally disregard. I'm like, what movies is he actually seeing other than when he's apparently saying he watches his own films and that gets him off, which is like, I kind of can't fathom somebody saying that in an interview while trashing everything that's around him. I mean, I'm just like, wow, like that's astounding. I don't think I've ever heard a director go to that extent as far as being critical of other people's work. It's unbelievable, and it goes unchecked because people will still like. Well, I don't think his films really make any money, barely, or if they do, they kind of do. But I don't think people really pay that much attention to his films anymore. I mean, he doesn't have that box office draw that he did, and but yet he just keeps going. He just keeps going and going. I just thought I'd run off a quick list, just off of my top of my head, of films that I've seen really recently, and in films I've seen within the last few years that I just think are fantastic, and you know, flies in the face according to Ridley Scott and his like ridiculous opinions. But I think like Ty West, the trilogy, the X trilogy that he's done, all three movies, I think those are phenomenal movies, absolutely phenomenal. They all came out very, very recently. I also think two movies I just saw recently are just absolutely fantastic. Probably the two best out of the year. The two best films I've seen this year. I would say One Battle After Another, the new Thomas Anderson film, is absolutely phenomenal. I would say The Long Walk, which is the latest big screen adaptation from a Stephen King story, absolutely phenomenal movie. I would say Robert Eggers' Nosferatu is, was absolutely incredible. My favorite version of the classic Dracula story. The Substance from last year was a phenom of a movie, a phenomenon as far as I'm concerned. Like, that was the best movie of 2024. Long Legs, starring Nicolas Cage, which came out last year, which is such a killer movie. That was directed by Osgood Perkins, son of the great icon, the late great Anthony Perkins. He also put out The Monkey, which came out this year, which is a phenomenal movie. I think one of the most underrated films that was released this year. Super awesome. Osgood Perkins, I think, is a force right now to watch. He's becoming one of my favorite directors, as well as Ty West. I've been following Ty West for years. He's done some of the last few films he's done are I think the best of his in his career. In a Violent Nature, which I think is one of the coolest modern slasher films that's ever come out. Phenomenal movie. I think Denis Villeneuve's Dune films that both came out the last couple of years are just absolute masterpieces. I think Killers of the Flower Moon was an incredible movie. That was the last film by Martin Scorsese, also starring DiCaprio. And I'm like, okay, those are just a few films that I can think of off the top of my head, and I know there's more that I think are just phenomenal. Curry Parker is a new voice in film right now, who is an independent filmmaker who is on the verge of doing some incredible things, and who I think is going to be someone we're going to have to really look out for. And then also, I think the last Ari Aster film, who directed Eddington, which came out this summer, which is a phenomenal movie. So these are all movies that just came out within the last few years. And again, I'm not looking at a list or a piece of paper. Don't have any notes. I'm just running movies. The Black Phone, which has a new sequel, is coming out really soon. But The Black Phone came out in the last few years as well. Phenomenal horror film. So these are just a loose. All of these movies I just talked about are just basically a loose list of movies that I can just kind of recall that are all like for what they are modern films, contemporary films that I think are all fantastic and they are all unique and different and are saying something with their own voice. But I think these are all like really great films. So but I guess according to Mr. Ridley Scott, that's not true. And I just feel like his arrogance is just out of bounds. And I kind of put him in the same thing, same category. And I've talked about this before, but like George Lucas and James Cameron and Ridley Scott. I again, there are films that they have all done that I cherish and love, but the majority of all of the work that they did was so early on in their career, and they've accumulated so much power and prestige and influence that they've become kind of godlike figures in Hollywood, and to where but then that comes for me with a cost because they have gotten so insulated. Their heads have gone so far up their own ass, and I, with comments that they've said about the industry and then attacking their own fans and coming across as just these like mega maniacal maniacs and self-serving in every possible way, that I have like basically lost respect for all three of these directors. And for me, with Ridley Scott's recent comments, I'm just like, that's it. Like I can't officially, I can't stand him anymore, and I wish he would just kind of go away. But I just wanted to make a response to this, you know, to these recent comments because again, I want to live in a free society where people can speak their thoughts and their actions and all these things. But and that's fine. He could say Ridley Scott can say whatever the hell he wants to say. But I think saying things like that, there are it's gonna have he has a lot of power and a tremendous amount of clout to a degree, and I think it's gonna shape people's minds. It's gonna create this perception from people. And again, I just named off a handful of films that just came out very recently and then also within the last year or two that I thought were just all incredible films. And again, I see good films and I watch a lot of films I don't like that I've discovered for the first time, or movies that I revisit that I feel like don't hold up as well. But then I'm also always discovering new things that are just incredible. And I never want to be so cynical and to totally play that card of all it nothing there's nothing good anymore being made. And because I feel like if you take the time and sift through it, and you have to sift through it a little bit more, you find some incredibly wonderful things. The same perception is cast on the music industry with music that comes out, and that people are always using that same argument. And it's just not true. If you take the time and with a little bit of open-mindedness and investigation, you'll find stuff that is absolutely incredible and completely inspiring. It takes a little bit more time now, and I just think that's such an ignorant thing. But I think, what Ridley Scott, again, he can say whatever he wants to say, but it's going to affect things. I think it does affect things. And I think, for when I look at new filmmakers like Curry Curry Barker, who I think is going to be this phenomenal force in the future. That guy has, so much talent. It's insane. And I'm like, he's this new upstarting director, filmmaker that just kind of came out of nowhere. And I'm like, your 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 remarks are completely casting a shadow on a new generation of people that are doing great work. Jordan Peele, again, amazing director. All of his films are just fantastic, so new and fresh and innovative. And I'm like, so it's like, just again from the top of my head, you take directors like Jordan Peele, Robert Eggers, Osgood Perkins, phenomenal directors. And I'm like, you can't whitewash and condemn the state of things because your head is so far up your own ass. And I feel like that's what Ridley Scott is all about. And even though in another film that I can think of, which I had a lot of issues with it, but I still think it was a very well done movie and very ambitious. I didn't think it really landed the mark for me, but still, it was a pretty well done film, Sinners, which came out. And I'm like, okay, what the hell? Like, again, another thing of just like another example of something that's actually really good, got some innovative ideas, even though I wasn't a huge fan of that film, and I've talked about it in some ways, but I still think it was pretty good. I did recommend that film, I believe, in my review. But I'm like, okay, that cancels out everything that he's saying, that Ridley Scott's saying, and I'm like, that's so ignorant and so like ridiculous. So I just wanted to make a quick little video for what it is about me. Just like I've lost respect for I kind of lost respect for Ridley Scott years ago, and now it's just like I remember when it really started to change for me was after he put out Alien Covenant, which is such a piece of garbage. And Prometheus, the same thing. I mean, just single-handedly drove it into the ground. And both of those movies like did not do very well. And I remember seeing an interview with Ridley Scott where he was saying, well, the real reason the Alien franchise is like in the shitter is, well, it's not because of my movies that I put out, but it's because of the Predator versus Alien films. I remember he specifically targeted those films as being the reason why the franchise itself took a turn for the worse. And I'm just like, are you serious? So I just wanted to do a quick video response for what it's worth on my reaction to Ridley Scott and how I've just lost complete respect for him. And I feel the same way about James Cameron and George Lucas. So yeah. Thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.